If you agree that true heroes don't need recognition to change lives, make sure to like and subscribe. This one still gives me chills every time I tell it. She was just a teacher. That's what everyone thought. Soft voice, neat handwriting, a smile that could calm even the wildest kid. But if you'd been there that afternoon, when the radio broke silence, you'd know just how wrong we were. They called her Commander Rowe. But before that day, she was just Ms. Danielle to us. I remember the first time I saw her walk into Lincoln Elementary. Late 20s, maybe 28 at most, short brown hair tucked behind her ear, eyes that scanned a room like she was counting exits. Not judging, not nervous, calculating. I thought it was just teacher instinct. Turns out, it was something much deeper. Danielle was the kind of person who blended into the background. But somehow, the room always moved around her. The kids loved her. She taught 5th grade history and life skills, made ancient wars sound like bedtime stories, and taught respect like it was part of breathing. When the rest of us were worn down by budgets and burnout, she'd be there, quietly fixing a broken projector or staying late to help a struggling kid who couldn't read a paragraph out loud without shaking. You wouldn't think she'd ever seen combat or blood or anything uglier than spilled juice on the carpet. But sometimes, when thunder rolled or a helicopter passed low over town, I'd catch her eyes darken, like she was somewhere else, somewhere she didn't want to return to. There was a rumor among the teachers that she'd done contract work overseas. Nobody knew what that meant, but the way she moved told me she wasn't lying. She had posture, the kind that comes from years of drills and discipline. When we did safety drills, she didn't flinch. She'd take charge naturally, calm but firm. Hallway clear. Kids under desks. Stay silent. It wasn't the words, it was how she said them. Authority wrapped in composure. Even Officer Reed, our on-site cop, followed her lead once when a lockdown drill went wrong. She smiled afterward, brushing it off like it was nothing. Just instincts, she said. But I caught her hand trembling slightly before she hid it in her pocket. One afternoon stands out more than the rest. We were prepping for a community showcase, and the kids were building little models of historical landmarks. The air smelled of glue sticks and cardboard. I was chatting with another teacher when one of the tables wobbled. The model fell, the glass display cracked, and before I could blink, Danielle moved. She pushed a student out of the way just as shards exploded across the floor. Not one piece touched the kids. Her arm was bleeding slightly, but she acted like she didn't notice. The nurse fussed, the kids panicked, but she just smiled, saying softly, "It's all right. Accidents happen." That night, I went to return her lesson plans and found her sitting in the empty classroom, staring at an old photograph. Faded edges, sun-bleached uniforms, a desert sky behind a helicopter wreck. Her hand brushed over the image, lingering on the faces. When she realized I was there, she tucked it away, smiling faintly. "Just old friends," she said. Her voice cracked on the word friends. After that day, I couldn't shake the feeling that our quiet little school held a story much larger than any of us understood. She was more than a teacher. You could see it in her patience, her discipline, the way she watched over the kids. Not like a teacher doing her duty, but like a soldier guarding her unit. She had a way of reading a room, anticipating trouble before it started. When a fight broke out during recess, she was there before the whistle blew. When a kid panicked during a lockdown drill, she was already kneeling beside them, whispering calm words that only someone who'd seen real fear could speak. The principal once asked her why she never joined any of the teacher socials, and Danielle just smiled, saying, "I've had enough crowds in my life." We thought it meant she was shy. Now I think it meant she'd spent too many nights in briefing rooms, too many missions where a crowd could mean exposure, danger, loss. Still, she was kind. She remembered birthdays, she donated quietly to struggling families, and she volunteered for every early shift without complaint. But there was one thing she never did. She never talked about herself. Not where she was from, not who her family was, not even what brought her to this quiet coastal town. It was like she'd simply appeared one morning, a guardian no one asked for, but everyone needed. Sometimes, I'd catch her glancing toward the hills beyond the playground, her gaze lingering on the horizon. Once, she said softly, "There's a kind of peace in knowing where danger might come from." I laughed it off then, but that line would haunt me later. Because peace wasn't something she seemed to believe in. It was something she earned, moment by moment, through vigilance. The day before everything changed, She was leading her students in a discussion about courage. One boy asked, "Miss Rowe, do you think heroes are real?" She smiled that small, wistful smile of hers and said, "Heroes are just people who do the right thing when no one's watching." The class went silent for a moment, even the troublemakers. It was the kind of answer that sticks with you. I didn't know it then, but those words were about to be tested in a way none of us could have imagined. Because the next morning, the morning the radio broke its silence, our quiet teacher, the one who blended into every hallway, was about to become the most extraordinary person we'd ever known. But for now, all I remember is that afternoon sun spilling through the classroom blinds, dust dancing in golden beams, and Danielle Rowe, smiling gently, bandaged arm resting on a stack of graded papers, telling her students that courage isn't about noise or medals. It's about doing what's right when it counts. I remember thinking how young she was to sound so old, how calm she seemed for someone who, deep down, carried storms we couldn't see. And somewhere beyond those classroom walls, across a world she thought she'd left behind, a signal was waiting to find her again. A voice she hadn't heard in years. The kind that doesn't just speak, it summons. But we didn't know that yet. We were just a school full of kids, teachers, and one woman who had already lived 100 lives in silence, waiting for the day that radio would crackle to life and call her by the name the world had forgotten, Commander Rowe. The morning it happened started like any other. Kids laughing in the hallways, coffee brewing in the teacher's lounge, the smell of rain still clinging to the air. Danielle was in her classroom early, as always, arranging lesson materials for her history through leadership unit. None of us knew that by lunch, she'd be commanding the entire building. Around 11, the intercom crackled once, then died mid-announcement. A second later, the power flickered. The lights dimmed, came back, and then every phone in the school went off at once. An emergency alert we'd never seen before. Local lockdown. Shelter in place. The principal's voice trembled over the PA, telling everyone to stay calm, but panic spread like wildfire. Kids started crying, teachers fumbling with locks and blinds, and in the chaos, Danielle's voice cut through everything. Steady, controlled, impossible not to follow. Lights off, desks against the walls. Stay low. Her tone was sharp but calm, like someone trained for this. When a teacher asked what was going on, she didn't answer, just moved to check every door and window. The power went out completely a moment later, plunging the classrooms in a silence broken only by the muffled sobs of frightened children. I was 2 doors down and could see her through the narrow glass strip in her classroom door. She was perfectly still, listening. Then she turned to her students and whispered, "Nobody move." Outside, sirens began to fade. Then a deep mechanical hum filled the air. It wasn't police. It was something heavier, something that vibrated through the floor. A few of the older kids recognized it. "Is that a drone?" one boy whispered. Before Danielle could answer, a sudden static burst came from the dusty old radio in the science lab, one we hadn't used in years. It screeched, then settled into a faint, broken voice. "Authorization Alpha 1. Repeat. Authorization Alpha 1. This is Command 7. Do you copy?" Every teacher in earshot froze. Danielle's head snapped toward the sound. She moved fast, slipping into the science lab before anyone could stop her. The radio was ancient, half buried under lab manuals, its light flickering weakly. The voice repeated, "Alpha 1. This channel is not secure. Confirm presence." Danielle stared at it for a moment, her face pale, jaw tightening. Then, in a tone none of us had ever heard from her, she pressed the transmit button and said quietly, "Alpha 1 confirmed. Identification Row 79. Stand by for verification." Silence. Then the voice came again, this time softer, almost relieved. "Commander Rowe, it's been a long time." The room felt suddenly smaller, the air thicker. I remember the look on the officer's face. He'd gone pale as chalk. "Did he just say Commander?" he whispered. Danielle didn't answer. She was still holding the radio, eyes distant, focused, as if the walls around her had melted away and she was back in some far-off command post. After a long pause, she spoke again. "Status report. What's the breach?" The voice replied, "Signal intersection near your coordinates. Classified operation compromised. Possible pursuit inbound." She turned, meeting my eyes through the glass. "Get everyone to the gym," she said. "Lock it down. No one leaves until I give the all clear." Her tone left no room for questions. Even the officer obeyed. She moved like she was back in uniform. Efficient, unshakable, precise. Outside, that low hum grew louder. Something overhead, a surveillance drone, maybe two, passed over the building, their sound blending with distant sirens. Danielle stepped into the hallway, scanning the ceiling and walls like she knew exactly where to look. Then she stopped in front of the PA system, reached up, and pulled a wire from the console, muting the static across every classroom. "They're triangulating signals," she muttered under her breath. We all stood there, stunned, waiting for an explanation that never came. She turned back to us, calm as if this were another lesson. "Everything's fine. Stay with the students. Keep them safe." Then she disappeared down the corridor toward the back exit, radio still in hand. For several minutes, the school was silent except for the sound of rain beginning to fall again. Then came the faint rumble of approaching vehicles. Black SUVs, unmarked, stopping just beyond the playground fence. Men in dark uniforms stepped out, scanning the area. And in that moment, every rumor, every instinct, every flash of discipline we'd ever seen in her finally made sense. Her quiet, gentle Miss Danielle Rowe wasn't who we thought she was. And whatever world she'd walked away from, it had just found her again. When the storm finally cleared, the power came back on and the emergency alert stopped. Parents crowded the school gate, frantic and confused, but by then the black SUVs were gone. No insignia, no explanation. The police called it a communication malfunction. The principal just nodded, pale and shaking, but those of us who'd seen it knew better. We'd seen her walk out with those men, steady as ever, head high, like she was reporting for duty. When she returned the next morning, there was no sign anything had happened. Her hair was tied back neatly, a soft smile on her face, greeting students at the door as if the world hadn't almost peeled itself open the day before. No one dared ask where she'd gone, but everyone was thinking the same thing. "Who are you really, Ms. Rowe?" I found her in the break room later, sitting quietly with a cup of coffee, staring out the window at the playground. I said her name softly, and she turned, offering that same gentle smile. "Everything okay?" she asked. I nodded, but my voice cracked when I said, "That man on the radio. He called you Commander." Her eyes softened then, but there was something behind them, something ancient, heavy, and tired. "A long time ago," she said. "That part of my life ended." When I asked why she didn't tell anyone, she looked back out the window and said, "Because peace isn't something you find on a battlefield. Sometimes you have to teach it." Over the next few days, the story spread through the town in hushed whispers. Kids told their parents about the radio voice that called her Commander. The officer stationed at school refused to talk about it, only saying she knew things she shouldn't have known. A week later, a letter arrived for her at the front office. No return address, just a Department of Defense seal on the flap. She opened it in private. I only saw her expression change, relief mixed with something close to grief. When she left that day, she stopped by the bulletin board, pinning a small photo in the corner. Her fifth graders smiling, holding up their model of the Lincoln Memorial. No uniform, no medals, just the caption written in her looping script. "History is made by those who protect it." The months went by, and the incident faded from memory for most. But every so often, we'd get a subtle reminder. A low-flying aircraft would pass over the coast, and she'd look up, not in fear, but recognition. Once, during a veterans' assembly, when the flag was raised, I caught a glimpse of her sleeve as she adjusted it. A faint tattoo along her wrist. The kind you don't get from a weekend tour. Coordinates, I think. Maybe a place she'd left behind, or one she'd saved. The following spring, her class put on a project called Everyday Heroes. Each child was asked to write about someone they admired. One little girl, Emma, stood on stage and read, "My hero is my teacher, Ms. Rowe. She says heroes are people who do the right thing when no one's watching. But I think heroes are people who protect you even when you don't know you need protecting." When she finished, Danielle's eyes shimmered, just barely. She clapped for every student, smiling softly, but I could tell she was holding something inside, something vast and unspoken. After the ceremony, I walked her to her car. The sun was setting, turning the sky gold and red. She leaned against the door, looking up at it, and said, almost to herself, "You can change uniforms, but service, that never leaves you." I asked if she ever missed it. The missions, the adrenaline, the life she'd walked away from. She shook her head. I don't miss the fight, she said. I miss the people. The ones who didn't get to find their peace. That night, I thought about the radio transmission, the voice calling her by a name we were never meant to hear. And I realized something. She hadn't been hiding from her past. She'd been honoring it, by building something good in its place. The classroom, the laughter, the quiet lessons about courage, it was her new mission. She stayed at Lincoln Elementary for 3 more years before moving to another town. On her last day, she left behind one final envelope for the staff. Inside was a single note written in careful handwriting. You don't need to carry a weapon to protect someone. Sometimes, all it takes is patience and the will to keep standing when others fall. No one ever heard that radio again. The old unit was sealed away in the maintenance closet, its cord coiled neatly beside it. But sometimes, when the school is quiet and the air hums just right, you could swear you hear faint static, a soft voice in the distance saying, Alpha 1, standing by. And somewhere out there, maybe she still is, our quiet teacher, the soldier who traded battlefields for chalkboards, still protecting what matters most, the future she once fought to save.